Hey everyone, I hope you are all as excited as I am to be here and have been having as much fun as I have been. CARE is like one of my all-time favorite conferences around the world, so give it up to Anima for organizing it. I was asked to talk about my life, and I figured a good place to start would be the beginning. So about 13.8 billion years ago, a super hot dense point exploded and started expanding, and it gave birth to our universe and everything in it. Millions of years later, gas and dust formed and condensed and collapsed and formed the first stars. The stars collected that remaining dust and gas and debris that was spinning around them and collapsed it into planets. The planets did the same thing to moons, etc. And this all formed the first solar systems. Now, these solar systems were then drawn towards each other through their massive gravitational pulls, forming super massive black holes at the center of them, capturing other stars, and these formed the first galaxies. So these galaxies then collected together and formed the first galaxy clusters. And then these galaxy clusters collected into the massive gravitational network of the dark matter web. And at the same time, dark energy formed, which is a force that rapidly expanded the universe. And it's still expanding the universe today, including space itself. And since then, everything in the universe has just been hurtling apart from everything else at unimaginable speeds. One day, galaxies will be so far apart from one another that if there's anyone around and they're just looking up at the sky, even with the best instruments, they won't be able to detect any other galaxies, and they'll just assume that we're alone and that they're the center of the universe, and they'll probably create some religion out of it, just like we've done. But this expansion will not stop there. It's going to keep going, and it's going to continue relentlessly. Eventually, planets will just be flung out of their solar systems. Stars will be ripped apart. Black holes will take over the cosmos, and even these eventually will be torn to shreds. All star formation will just stop. There'll be no more stars, even atoms, and the most fundamental particles will just be torn apart. And in the end, there will be no more heat and there will be no more light. And then everything will go dark. Thankfully, though, in this vast, indifferent, unbelievably violent, rapidly expanding universe, there are objects in it right now that are slowing down that expansion, at least locally. And these objects hold things together. And these objects, sorry, I have to hold three things at once here. So these objects are the planets and the moons and the stars that we know today. And we're very lucky that our planet only has one star. We only have one sun. Most solar systems in the universe have multiple stars. They have 2 to 6 stars. The problem with those systems, though, is that they tend to be very unstable. Their orbits around the stars are very unstable, and planets will just get flung out of them very regularly. We're also very lucky that we have an unusually large moon. So the moon that we have helps protect the Earth through its very violent history from like asteroid strikes and things like that. And it was this rare combination of factors that allowed life to emerge on Earth and thrive for so long. In fact, life emerged almost immediately after planet Earth was formed. For most of the planet's history, life existed just as bacteria. It was like bacteria, 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 bacteria. And it wasn't only until about like 800 years ago or so that the first animals began to appear. With the first being a very simple animal known as the sponge. Probably looks something like that. And then I was born. And that's basically it. And I was born in a little corner of the earth, and you may have heard of it. It's called the United States of America. Now, I was born in North Carolina. My daddy was a cowboy, and my mama was a nurse. They were working class folk. My family is Jewish. They are originally from Ukraine. In the early 1900s, they fled the Russian pogroms, escaping the massacre that claimed the lives of every single Jew in their town. And they found refuge in the United States. And they started over in Baltimore. And when my great-grandfather got to Baltimore, he opened a bar. During World War II, my grandfather fought the Nazis. He helped liberate concentration camps. And this type of resilience wasn't just about survival. They thrived against impossible odds. Fueled by an unshakable spirit, a defiant can-do attitude that runs very deeply within my family today. So this is them. And this spirit really helped shape who I ended up becoming in my life. This led me to the punk scene. I'm going to sound like an old man when I say this, but in the early 2000s, the Baltimore punk scene at least, it was all about defiance and a do-it-yourself independence and activism. Punk back then, at least, it wasn't just a music. It was really about, it was like a subculture that was trying to change the world for the better. In high school, my friends and I formed a social justice group called Global Toxins. And we were tackling all types of issues like homelessness in the city, women's rights, police brutality, things like this. We also did a little bit of animal rights. But at the time, I felt like animal rights was very neglected and was probably the most overlooked out of all those issues. So I decided to create a spin-off group. And I wanted the spin-off group to just solely focus on animal rights. From that moment on, as soon as I did that, I just knew immediately, like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I dropped out of school, and I devoted all of my spare time to the organization, just organizing and building it. And this organization later became the Humane League. And I never looked back after that. And that was about 25 years ago. One of the main questions that I get very frequently is, how have you stayed in the movement so long? And what keeps you going? So I wanted to share with you some of the lessons that were hard earned for me and discuss some of the benefits, some of the challenges, and some of the best practices if you want to stick around the movement too. So I'm going to give you 5 things that you can do to increase the chances that you will stay in the movement long term. So the first is to just make up your mind. And this may seem like very obvious, but there is more to it than meets the eye. We're always faced with choices at any given time, and we all have the freedom to choose. And this freedom can feel very overwhelming and even anxiety-inducing, because every choice we make means that we're letting go of another choice. And we only have one life, and time is very fleeting. So everything that we choose can feel very absolute. And this fear of finality leads some people to just avoid making choices altogether, or to try to walk multiple paths at one time. But as the saying goes, you can't ride 2 horses with one saddle. You just have to decide. And there's an important choice before us at all times, and that is to stay in the movement or to not. And this decision, it really has to be a conscious one. So I think like you should really just give yourself the permission to leave the movement. Have that as an option. It's okay to step away. Many do. Many people come to the movement, they serve their few years, kind of like someone would in the Peace Corps, and then they bounce. And that's cool. That's great. But if you want to realize your full potential, to see what you're really truly made of, and to make the greatest impact for animals, you must consciously choose to stay on this path. One thing that I like to do that helps, I think is a good framing exercise, is to frame this decision in a way that will fully help you commit with total focus. So yes, it can be scary. You're giving up other opportunities when you go down this one path, and you don't know where this path is going to lead. It's also scary to not have all the answers when you just commit to one path, but that's okay. I can tell you right now, you will never have all the answers. You just must trust the process and commit to the path, and the path will take care of you if you do this. So when I dropped out of school to start the Humane League, I didn't expect a salary or any stability in my life. I just expected to be poor the whole time and like keep having my bank account in the negative and the gas and electric turned off. But over time, I was just building this organization, and I started making connections and started getting wins, and the organization started to grow. And now the organization provides for me. More importantly, it provides for animals. But one thing that it does give me is a purpose in life. So the next thing I recommend is you want to make sure you feel some connection to the impact of the movement. So you must really like viscerally feel that whatever you're doing is going to be making a difference. So this is really about just like seeing your own value in the movement. And it sounds silly, but there's a lot of research around this, that if you don't have this, you're not going to stick around. So it's really important to make sure that no matter what you're doing, you see some connection between whatever you're doing and the impact that the movement is having. And I don't care if you're just like stuffing envelopes or if you're breaking into farms and directly rescuing animals. You really got to feel this connection to the impact. And a lot of times this just comes down to reframing as well. So like if you're doing like boring operational work, try to reframe it this way. Like you are the backbone of the organization that allows it to even function in the first place. If you're a campaigner, you're one of the many that are on the front lines. If you're a volunteer, you're a critical supporter of organizations who need your help. And if you're an event organizer, you build the platforms that allow community to flourish. So this doesn't mean that you should just do feel-good activism, but you do need to make sure that your activism feels good to you. So part of feeling good is growing and constantly growing. So the third thing I recommend is adopting a growth mindset. Activism is kind of like a shark. It just has to keep moving forward or it dies. So you will be far more likely to stay in the movement if you're constantly growing and constantly learning and improving yourself. And there's only one way to grow and improve yourself, and that is to suck at the beginning. You must accept that you're going to suck. Like you're going to fail. You're going to embarrass yourself. You're going to be humiliated. It's going to be extremely uncomfortable. And that is something like you just have to accept and get over. So in every pursuit, there is an uncomfortable stage. But on the other side of that is where the magic is. And you have to be willing to go through those uncomfortable stages in order to grow. Like that's what growing is. So this means being able and willing to make a total fool of yourself and suffer through that humiliation and not let it keep you down. This is probably the biggest blocker to success. People are just so afraid to fail in front of others or be humiliated. So you just have to be willing to humiliate yourself. And the longer that you wait, the more time passes where you're not making any progress at all. So it's really important that you get over this fear and you just start today, because you will get better and you will be very thankful that you did. So when I first started jiu-jitsu training, I remember going in the first day. This was like at my boxing class, and I was just like curious about it. So I decided to sign up for a class. I got my ass kicked so hard that day, and then I just didn't go back for a while. I was like, that sucked. But when I did go back, I was like, okay, this time I'm going to stick with it. And one thing that I noticed was, like, after some time, like, yeah, I was still getting my ass kicked, but after some time, I was starting to be able to tap people out. And there's a saying in jiu-jitsu that I really love, and that's a black belt is simply a white belt that never quit. So I find the same thing to be very true in activism. Like, I'm not that smart of a guy, and I'm not naturally talented at basically anything, but I did get good at some things with time and just with repetition, just doing them over and over and over again. I never took a public speaking course. I never took a negotiations class. I'm not naturally good at either of those things. I just had more time under my belt than some people because I just started and stuck with it. And you can really master anything this way. I really, really believe that. It just takes discipline. So a lot of people concern themselves with motivation. But I think what is much more effective than motivation is just simple discipline. So there are days that you're just not going to feel like doing anything, and motivation is not going to help you on those days. Discipline will, though. Like, if you don't want to get out of bed, discipline, you will force yourself to get out of bed. You don't feel like doing it, do it anyway. You don't want to wake up and go to the gym, you wake up and go to the gym. You don't want to finish that little annoying task that's in your inbox, you force yourself to finish that little annoying task. And if you work hard every day, like, you just can't not get good at something. Just small changes, like, over time, lead into very big, dramatic changes. So force yourself to do things that you don't want to do. The first time that I ever gave a talk in my entire life was to an auditorium of 400 students. So the entire school was there, every student, the dean, all the teachers, like some parents. And not only did I not want to do this, like, I was absolutely terrified. I was, like, totally scared out of my mind. I've never given a talk before. I never put together a presentation. I had no idea what I was doing. But I knew I had to do it. I signed up for it and I said yes. I couldn't pass up on the opportunity to speak to 400 students about the plight of animals. So I decided to do it, and I sucked. I totally bombed that. But you know what? The next time that I spoke, I was a little bit better. And then the time after that, I was a little bit better than that, and so on. So I really recommend, this is something I practice regularly, is just doing something that scares you, and do that often. Like, sign up for something that you don't feel ready for. Like, sign up for an interview or a podcast or a speaking opportunity, something that makes you highly uncomfortable and you feel totally unprepared for. This will force you into a state of growth, because when you have that deadline coming up, like, you are going to prepare for it, and you're going to learn a lot during that, and you are going to take a step up. You're just going to level up. And if you just keep doing that, that accumulates over time, and it always pays off. And the cool thing is that once you start having success, the pressure on you to meet expectations, it just only increases. And that's a good thing, because that means that you're going to get more opportunities to grow. And you're going to have to work harder, and then you're going to grow some more. And then people are going to expect more of you, ad infinitum. And then you just get into this state where you're just constantly growing, and you're getting good at a lot of different things. So just keep growing, keep learning, and keep improving yourself. The fourth thing I recommend is finding community. So get involved with some local community. And if you don't have one, try to find one. If you can't find one, create one. The chances of you continuing to do anything in the movement are basically next to zero if you don't have a community. You don't have a sense of belonging. So we're social creatures, and we need a strong community to last. That's just a fact. Now, Anima is a really great example of this. I've never met a team that is so warm and welcoming and fun and supportive of one another and to volunteers and newcomers. They're also just very cool and smart, and they have good style. But it just makes you want to be around these people. Like, it just makes you want to have them around all the time. And like, you can just feel it when you're hanging out with people from Anima. So try to find or build a community that can replicate this, that you can be a part of. But make sure that you choose wisely here, because I really recommend surrounding yourself with people that you admire. Everyone likes to think that they're so independent and that we all shape ourselves and that we can't be influenced by those around us, or we're not subject to peer pressure. All of that's nonsense. We're completely influenced by everybody around us. So choose carefully who you have around you. Try to put smarter people around you, or people around you that encourage you to get better. You're going to take on their characteristics in a very short time. Just make sure you surround yourself with the right people. I think it's extremely important to do this. But no matter what you do, especially if you're successful at anything, you will encounter the haters. 100% guarantee. You will be attacked in some way or another by opponents, by the government, corporations, your colleagues, people you thought who were your friends. You will be criticized. And people will talk behind your back. This is just going to happen. But I say forget the haters, because when they're talking about you, you're just going to be working. And when they're gossiping and talking behind your back, you're going to be getting better at something. When they are playing victim, you're owning something and mastering it. So just don't get sucked into all the drama. Avoid gossip. Don't talk behind other people's backs. It's just a distraction. That's all it is. And forgetting the haters doesn't mean that you should neglect your reputation. If you join a community, you have the responsibility to be a good member of that community. So you want to make sure you treat everyone, even people you don't like, treat them with respect. Again, don't talk poorly about them behind their backs. If you have a problem with someone, just talk to them about it. Address it with them. Also, you want to make sure you keep your ego in check. It's very easy to have a big ego in the animal rights movement because we're such a small community. So big fish in this community, we're in a very small pond. It's important to remember that. But it's not even about us anyway. It's about building a community that can function so that we can optimize our impact for animals. You also want to be just like generally supportive of others, other organizations. Don't view other organizations as some competitor. It's important to look at all other organizations as just part of one super group. Like, we're all in the same movement. We all want the same things. We might have different ways of doing it, but don't look at them as competitors. In fact, I highly recommend supporting other organizations. Go to their events, volunteer with them. If you have expertise that you can share, sign up to be a mentor or something like that. Also, there are a lot of very smart people in the movement. A lot of topics are very emotionally charged. I think it's just important to always just assume that the other person that you're speaking to, they have the best of intentions. They're not trying to sabotage you. They're not trying to take you down or anything. Like, we're all here for animals, and I think it's really important just to assume that about the other person, that they are acting in good faith. And then really just try to see the best in everyone. Like, it's so easy to point out something that people are doing wrong, but if you just force yourself to pay attention, there's so much you can learn, from everybody in this room. Everyone in this room has something really valuable to offer. So really try to look for that. and put relationships above all else. This will serve you and it will serve animals. Like, put relationships above all else. And then just like outside of not being a jerk, simply just be yourself, because pretending to be something or someone that you're not, it's just not sustainable. And it's totally exhausting. And people see right through it. Like, people are very sensitive to like authenticity. And if you're not being authentic, people are going to notice that. And they're not going to like you. They're not going to trust you. They're going to think you're fake. People are all humans, and they like interacting with other human-like characters. So try to be yourself. Also, don't take yourself too seriously. The work that we're doing is not easy. It's already tough enough. There's no reason that we need to be making it tougher. And then finally, just remember what we are up against. Because when we have a why, we can accomplish any how. So never forget that, like, what we are doing and why we are doing that. It sounds stupid, like, oh, how am I going to forget that? It happens all the time. So make a conscious effort to just keep in the back of your mind, what are we even doing here? Like, why did we gather here this weekend? And what are we doing? Like, that is an important question to ask yourself. Because over the past century, a dystopian system has quietly taken root. You all know this. It's driven by profit and mass production at all costs. We know it as factory farming. Our governments, like, euphemistically call it concentrated animal feed operations or something like that. But no matter what you call it, the reality is very clear. It's a cruel industrial scale nightmare that's inflicted upon innocent beings. And this is a fight that we are in, and the stakes could not be higher. Lives like hers are on the line at all times, and they hang in the balance. Many billions of hers, like hers, by the way. So the amount of suffering that we're dealing with is just enormous. The number of animals that are raised and killed for food is incomprehensible. Everything about this problem is just gigantic. And it can be very easy to forget that as well. So for millennia, people have been eating animal products. This practice is deeply ingrained in all of our cultures. You see it in daily life and in people's identity. Most people eat these foods like 3 times a day, at least. And food is a very sensitive topic for people. For some reason, it's deeply personal. I really understand that, but it makes it difficult to discuss. And on top of this, we are up against big business. We're up against like mega corporations, governments, superpowers that have like vested interest in these systems. Like, our enemies are literally mighty empires. And we're tiny. Like, to illustrate this, just look at this graph. So the little red stripe that you see, that's THL's total operating budget. That's all the money that we have. On the right, in black, that's Walmart's advertising budget alone. That's not their total budget. That's just their advertising budget. I tried graphing their total budget, but THL wouldn't even show up on the graph. So statistically speaking, next to companies like Walmart, we don't even exist. So it doesn't even seem possible that we could win anything against even a single company. And we're up against hundreds of them. So the odds are just completely stacked against us. It's incredible that we can move the needle for animals at all when you look at it this way. It's insane that we can get anything done for animals when we're up against these titans. And the simple fact is, there are no silver bullets to this problem. No one knows the answer. Everyone likes to talk like they do, but no one knows how we solve this problem. If they did, factory farming would be ended. All of our friends and family would be vegan by now. No one knows the answer to this. What matters is that we all just keep working and trying it's really just like a devotional practice. Because the road ahead of us, it's very long. How long that's going to be, no one really knows. And I know that, like in this moment, it can be difficult to identify progress for animals. But if you stay committed and you stay on the path long enough, you can witness the very long arc of change. And this is not an easy path. It's definitely a struggle, but it's our burden to bear. Like, we all chose this. This was important to us for a reason. So we must make a conscious choice to accept that burden. Along the way, we'll face many obstacles, many setbacks, and we'll endure hardships. We're going to suffer losses. We're going to have to make sacrifices, and we'll celebrate victories. But the journey, it will be frustrating, and it's going to be dissatisfying at times. But if you choose to stay on the path, you can be one of the very few bright lights in a very cold and very dark world for animals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. And you can still submit questions through the inventory app. And we'll go with the first one. Have you ever had doubts that switching to another path would make you more effective in improving the world?
Yes. Sorry, I should probably use the mic. Yes. I've thought about leaving the movement many times. And I have wondered, could I be doing something like, I remember when like 80,000 hours came out and they were talking about, maybe one of the most effective things we could do is go get a job, make a lot of money, and then donate that money. And I thought about that, like taking that option. But I did change my mind about that, and I don't think that is the best move. I do think like talent, like a lot of us in this movement have very niche skills that are very hard to find. And I think there's a lot of value in that and a lot of innovation. And to me, that is way more valuable than like any donation that we might be able to give if we were to leave the movement and donate to an organization.
Thank you. And we have another question. How can the person who's stuffing envelopes keep up a growth mindset if there's no opportunity for them to grow in the position they are currently in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is just part of you just have to trust the process. Like, I think a lot of people just want to see everything laid out in like a 10-year plan, but in reality, that's just not how it works. Like, if you volunteer with an organization, you do boring things like stuffing envelopes, you're going to meet other activists doing that, and you're going to get plugged into a network. You're going to start discovering more and more opportunities down the road. You're going to grow as an individual all this time, and then opportunities will start to present themselves. So I know like it can be really hard to see if it feels like, oh, there's no career path in front of me, but you kind of just have to stick with it. And as I mentioned in my presentation, I really do think like if you follow those things that I laid out, and like you keep growing, you're going to get better and better and better at different things. You're eventually going to become like pretty invaluable to the movement, and organizations are going to want you to come work for them.
Okay, so now a bit of an icebreaker question. What is your favorite planet?
Ooh. Well, I hate Jupiter. I think Earth is actually pretty cool. Because when you look around, so far we have not found any other signs of life anywhere. Everywhere we're actively looking for this, and it seems to be pretty precious, at least in this part of the universe. So I think it's also pretty wild that we're formed out of stardust, and now we're all like conscious beings walking around and can study the universe that we came from. I just think that's cool, and I think humans are a cool species for like that reason. You know, I know they do a lot of bad stuff, but yeah, I think they're pretty cool.
Okay. What can leaders do to help their team to shine and thrive in the movement?
To shine and cry.
Thrive.
Oh, thrive. Okay. I was like, what sicko asked this question?
That was a tricky one.
Okay. So I think the best thing that leaders can do is set a really good example for the movement. I think like uphold that integrity that I was speaking of. Just being nice and welcoming to everyone, not being a jerk, not having an ego about everything, and just being welcoming. Like, I remember when I first got involved in the movement, I remember like very clearly who was like really welcoming to me at that time. And like, if those people weren't there, I don't know if I'd ever joined the movement. So I think just really leaders have an extra big responsibility to live up to those values.
And how can activists become more risk-taking and comfortable with making mistakes?
For me, like, I just force myself to do it, and like, you have to accept it in your mind. Like, this is going to be completely embarrassing. It's going to suck, but time is going to pass. And just like all things, this suckiness will pass too. I think this is true for anything though, not just activism. Like, I remember the first time I went dancing, and I didn't know how to dance, so I just like wiggled my leg around a little. Made a total ass of myself. But yeah, I just had fun with it, and I just like kept going back, and now I really like dancing. I think it's just like that. Like, you just have to accept in your mind, like, failing is okay, and humiliation is okay. And I think we like to imagine that like other people like are constantly thinking about us all the time. This is not true. Like, most people walk around just like thinking about themselves all the time. I think that thought to me is like very comforting and allows me to do very humiliating stuff. So yeah, I think it's just how you think about failure and embarrassment. And I think it's also important, like, I hear a lot of groups talking about failure, but like, I don't think failure is okay if you don't like get some lesson out of it. I think you have to be able to walk away with something. You just can't keep failing for failing's sake. So I think like if that's instilled into any staff or volunteers or anything, that concept, I think there's going to be a higher chance of success in them sticking around.
Do you think our movement is overcoming division and infighting? How can we do better?
Yes. When I first joined the movement, it was in a pretty turbulent period. I joined at like maybe the height of like the radicalism in the movement, which is actually what attracted me to the movement. When I first got in, I was like, oh, you get to smash things and set things on fire? I'm doing that. But then like over time, like I realized, okay, there's more effective things I could be doing. But there was a huge division at that time between abolitionists and welfare, the famous two camps of the movement. But back then it was much more pronounced. Like, there was debates all the time about this, like abolition versus welfare, philosophy, on stage at conferences. And I think like the more attention that we gave it as a movement back then, the worse it got. And I've noticed like a very tangible change, particularly in the last like 10 years, where I rarely hear this come up, like ever. I know there are some exceptions to that in certain countries. This is more pronounced, but in general, in terms of the whole movement, I think we're like pretty much past that. So there is other type of infighting, but that was the primary one. And the fact that we got over that, I'm very, very happy about and excited about.
Any advice on how to deal with disappointment when you don't achieve the results you are working for?
Yeah. So I think like it's easy to look at, like, let's say you're launching a campaign or something and you didn't win. It's easy to think about that as, okay, that campaign failed. But there's other ways to look at that situation that I think are really important. These type of situations have a lot of other type of value. So one, that is a learning experience, like for your entire organization. You just walked through an entire campaign. Maybe there's you can analyze that. You have like a case study that you can look at, see, maybe we should have done this, maybe we should have done that. Also, some of these campaigns, like, they have other value than the primary target switching. So I remember, like, in the US, THL launched a 3-year campaign. It was actually over 3 years, it was like maybe closer to 4 years, against McDonald's. And McDonald's never buckled under that campaign. And we invested a lot of resources in this, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of our staff's time. And even though McDonald's never did like make the commitment, they still haven't today. So many other companies did, because they just saw what we were doing to McDonald's. So I think there's a lot of other types of value rather than just like the primary target of something that you might have lost.
Okay, quick note to the public, please upvote questions if you find any like particularly interesting. And another one is, what aside from the why keeps you disciplined over the years?
I would say the why is by far the most important for me. Anytime I have thought about stepping out of the movement or like experienced some type of burnout or something, the why is always what brought me back. Just anytime you think about how many people are like actually care about animals, it's very, very small. And then the amount of people who work for animals is even smaller. So that is what usually brings me back. But I also I really love this community. I find it so interesting and so unique. And I don't think I just haven't seen anything out there like it. And that has like this sense of unity and diversity and ideas. And so I would say the why and the community.
Do you believe everyone can learn to be good at anything, or is there only a limited pool of potential skills to master?
Yeah, I'm not like a psychologist or anything, and I'm sure there are a lot of dumb people out there who have trouble learning, but I think the general principle applies. Like, if you practice something every day, even just a little bit, there's no way you're not going to improve. So I think that general principle applies. And yeah, I think some people might have some characteristics that might make them better or more likely to advance in some activities than others. I think that's going to be natural, yes, but still, I think that general principle applies.
What are you the most and the least proud of in your animal advocacy journey?
Most of my pride comes from the work of the OWA. I just think it's really special how the groups in OWA just share information and practice generosity. And like I'd say like another big difference that I noticed when I first started in the movement and now. When I first started in the movement like 25 years ago, the movement was very small, but all the groups basically like saw each other as total competitors. So everyone kept everything like close to their chest and didn't share information. OWA groups are really inspiring in that they foster that culture of like cooperation. Yeah, so I just love OWA.
And looking into the future, do you think we'll see the end of factory farming in your lifetime?
Oh, sorry, I didn't talk about the least proud of. It's an important one. Yeah. Yeah, so there are definitely nights where I wake up in cold sweat and like think about something cringy I did like 10 or 15 years ago. Some of those were like stupid mistakes that I made in a meeting. Like I just said something completely stupid or walked myself right into a trap. I can't think of anyone in particular, but yeah, I've also just like, when I first started speaking, I one time just like totally froze on stage and like couldn't remember anything. Like my mind just went blank. I still like wake up sometimes thinking about that because it was so cringy. But I have many, many examples of that.
You're doing pretty good now.
Thanks.
Okay, so back to the audience questions. What is your biggest failure as an activist, and what you have learned from it?
Biggest failure, I would say starting a campaign and then never seeing it through all the way to the end. Like when I first got involved, we would do all types of activism, like a lot of stuff against animal testing. So I was like heavily involved in those campaigns in the early 2000s, but never finished them. And I think that lab is still around. The fur campaign, I was really heavily involved in the fur campaign, and then just like walked away from that to work on something else. And most activists did that in the U.S. Like the fur campaign basically died, with some exception. And the fur industry is now like thriving. They found a way to thrive. And I see the risk of organizations like doing the same thing, especially trying to keep up with like an AI mindset of like, oh, we found some new creature that's producing even more numbers that can suffer even more, and then you can almost like issue hop and never finish an issue. And I think I look back and I really wish that I would have like saw to the end some of those campaigns.
So do you think we'll see the end of factory farming in your lifetime?
I'm not hopeful about that. However, I have been pleasantly surprised to see how much progress the movement has been able to make in the last 25 years that I've been involved. I remember, like, I think this was in 2012 or 2013. A good friend of mine, we were sitting on a beach together, and we were just talking about like our work at THL, and we thought to ourselves, like, if we could one day eradicate cages in the egg industry from the US, then our lives would have been worth living. And now, like, we're seeing that actually happen, and we're moving on to other things. So I had pretty low expectations of the world, but I was shocked at the speed of some of the campaigns and progress that the movement's been able to win. Like in my lifetime, I also never thought we'd see the end of like animals in entertainment, but that's like starting to happen in the US. Like Ringling Brothers went out of business and cited concern for animals as one of the reasons. So I think there's a lot of evidence that like what we're doing is working, and we just need to keep moving forward. I really do think that's the most important thing.
You said that it is important to stick to learning and constantly improving, but there might be a case that you are not fitted to do something. Do you have a way of telling when is the time to give up on something and try to do something else?
Yeah, this is always a really tough one for me because I tend to get obsessed over things to the point where they just have diminishing returns that don't matter anymore. So I have trouble letting go of like things like campaigns. I'm also very stubborn, and I don't like to lose. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about this. I think this is like one of the reasons why it's good to have a team that can like talk about these things and keep each other in check, and not just have like some maniac that just like pushes one campaign on forever. But I think it's more just like a judgment call. There's no formula for that, unfortunately. So yeah, I think this is why you need a team and you need to discuss these things.
Do you think it makes sense to invest in supporting activists when they have a hard time overcoming fears or hardship? Or should we focus more on finding more resilient people?
Yeah, if we could start out with resilient people, that would obviously be better. But it's not always an option. Like, we don't get to select who cares about animals. Resilience, I do think, has been an issue in the movement that I think that we should really work on. I know I've heard like Kirsty talk about it a lot. I know she has a presentation called Grit that I really enjoyed that was about this. But yeah, if I had my way, we would just have all resilient people from the get-go. But I just don't think there are that many people. The pool isn't large enough to go out and select like only resilient people. So we got to work with what we got, like all you guys. So.
Okay, I think we have time for like 3 more questions. What do you think our movement is not doing enough about? Are there any campaigns that need to happen that we are not currently devoting enough attention to?
Campaigns that we're not devoting enough attention to. Similar to what I was mentioning before about issue hopping. I think there, I gave a talk about this yesterday. I ran a workshop about it, about holding companies accountable to commitments. I think that is something that the movement really, I keep saying it over and over, I know, and it's annoying, but I think it's really important that the movement does this, because this is going to set an example. I remember when I was meeting with Aldi about broiler chickens, they kept bringing up something that happened with bananas at their stores that had nothing to do with chickens. But every time we met with them, they just kept bringing it up and bringing it up and bringing it up. And if they had some failure about, I think like conflict-free bananas, something like that. So I think like if we allow that to happen with a major issue like cage-free, for instance, I think that is going to be pretty disastrous for all future corporate work. So I think it's important that we figure out a way to hold companies accountable to these policies. It's been going well, but we got a lot more work to do on that.
And how can we become better at building relationships with other activists?
So I really think like kind of casual settings is sometimes the best way to do that. You just like hang out with someone and just talk to them like you would anyone else and not treat them like a professional associate or something. I think that's the best way to build relations. Like you get to know people on a human level. You get to talk about things outside of animal rights. And that's where you start really building these relations. Additionally, I think going through things together, like I think back to the early days of the Humane League when we were a really small core group of people, and we were launching all types of different campaigns together. We were getting arrested together. We were winning together. We were losing together, and all of that that common experience formed like lifelong bonds. So I don't know if there's any way to like replicate that, but it is something I think about a lot, though.
And the last question, we're going to end on a positive note. What is your biggest regret?
Biggest regret. Let's see. Biggest regret. I don't know. I don't really have any regrets. I just like to live with like a mindset of like experiment. So like I've done some stupid things in my life and I've messed some things up, but like, again, I think that's totally okay as long as you learn from it and you do something different the next time. So it's hard for me to answer like a question about regret. There's probably one deep inside me that I buried a long time ago that will come haunt me one day. But in general, yeah, I don't like to live that way and like regret things. I think like if you can get a really good lesson out of it, then like what's to regret, unless you hurt somebody or something like that, which I'm not going to talk about up here.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your talk and answering all the questions.